When researching a place to live, I definitely want to know not only the good, but also the bad and ugly about a particular location so that I can determine if that's the right spot for me. Now, while Austin is obviously a fantastic city in so many ways, and I've chosen it as my place to call home, there are so many things that you need to know and so many changes that have happened over the last 5 to 10 years with all of the growth that we've experienced. So today, I'm going to break down the top 10 reasons not to move to Austin so that ultimately you can decide if Austin is the right spot for you. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, you may have heard this one before, especially if you're browsing homes online and you're getting a feel for the Austin real estate market. So in general, the cost of living in Austin is higher than what a lot of people expect. Specifically, Austin sits about 15% above the national average in terms of cost of living. So you can see that's quite a bit higher than what you probably expected when moving to Texas. Now, of course, this is relevant depending on exactly where you're living right now. If you're coming from the higher priced areas like California and New York, then you may be like a kid in a candy shop here in Austin. But if you're not coming from those areas, you may be surprised to find that our cost of living is a bit higher than expected. Now, there is a workaround to that, and that's to move to some of the suburbs surrounding Austin. These are about 30 minutes from downtown Austin. So in the grand scheme of things, incredibly convenient. If you are in these suburbs, you're actually sitting about 7 to 8% below the national average in terms of cost of living. So you can see that you have a lot of opportunity in the surrounding areas of Austin. Be sure to check out some of my other videos that highlight a lot of the affordable neighborhoods in the suburbs of Austin where you can find really nice homes and learn a little bit more about each of those particular spots. One more thing to point out that's a nice little perk to living in Austin is that no matter where you are in the greater Austin area, your groceries and day-to-day necessities are actually lower than the national average in terms of cost. So while the housing in central Austin may be 15% higher than you'll find in other parts of the country, your day-to-day necessities are still much less expensive. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. And as I mentioned earlier, also a trade-off if you're open to living in some of the more suburban areas surrounding greater Austin. Now, the next downside to living in the area is the hot summer that we have here. Now, I grew up in San Antonio, so I've gotten pretty used to the heat and I've actually come to enjoy it a lot of times. This last summer that we had though was unusually hot, so it was a big deterrent for a lot of people. We saw a lot of triple-digit days, which I do want to reiterate is fairly unusual. We do have hot summers though. It's typically in the upper 90s. So if you're not used to that and you're coming from a more mild climate, then that could be a deterrent for you. But on the flip side, we also have a lot of really nice outdoor spots where you can cool off. We have Lake Austin, Lake Travis. A lot of the homes in the area have pools as well. So if you're not acclimated to our hot Texas summers, you probably will do so quickly, and you definitely have some watering holes where you can cool off. I do want to point out that by being located in Austin though, there is a saving grace. If you were in a city like Houston, you're so much closer to the Gulf of Mexico, and with that comes a ton of humidity and mugginess throughout the year. So if you're in Houston, you're still going to get the hot Texas summers, but multiply that by a lot more because of the humidity, and it's just completely miserable. So when you're in Austin, we have a much more arid climate. It's of course not as dry as Arizona, Nevada, and some of the desert cities and states, but it is much drier than you're going to find as you get closer to the Gulf. So again, wanted to point out that that is certainly a saving grace by being located a little bit more centrally located within the state of Texas. Before diving into my next pain point about Austin, I want to welcome you to the channel, or welcome back to the channel. My name is Aubrey von Behren. I'm a licensed real estate broker here in the Austin area, helping hundreds of people relocate to the city. So be sure to call, text, or email me. I would love to help with your home search as well. If you're happy with the content that you're seeing today and the other videos that I put together for you, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell so that you're alerted of all of the new videos that I'll be putting out for you on a weekly basis. Also, be sure to like and comment. I would love to hear your feedback about this video. Maybe any other pros or cons that you've heard about the Austin area, drop those in the comments below, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Now, Austin definitely takes the cake in comparison to a lot of the other major Texas metros, but where I think they really fail is in their road system. I grew up in San Antonio. It's a large, spread out city. I'm also very familiar with Dallas and Houston, having spent a lot of time in both of those cities. And what I don't like about Austin is that we're kind of gridlocked with our road system. In all of those other major cities that I mentioned, they have really nice interstates. They have loops around the city, they have tollways, just much more functional in comparison to Austin. Now, I'm not really sure exactly what that's about. I do know that Austin probably never expected to go from a small town with our state capital to a major tech hub and experiencing the type of growth that we did in a relatively short period of time. Now, one thing that it could be as well is that Austin has a lot of topography. We do have a lot of hilly areas. We have a nice lake, aka the Colorado River, running through downtown. So there's a lot of topography that needs to be accounted for in the development of these road systems. So I do think that Austin had some constraints in that regard, but nonetheless, it definitely impacts traffic and congestion. And with the growth that I mentioned and the density that the city is experiencing, it doesn't really make for a very pretty traffic and congestion situation. Now, with that being said, there are workarounds to pretty much everything. Now, if you're coming from your major cities, Austin traffic will not compare. It's so much better than all of those locations. Now, you can also plan accordingly. So our traffic patterns are pretty typical with rush hour. So early in the morning and into the evening, we don't have a ton of traffic throughout the day like you'll find in some of these other major metros. So that is a good thing. And that is at least where it sits right now. Now, this next one doesn't really bother me. It does bother a lot of locals. I will tell you later in the video what does really bug me about the Austin area, but this isn't necessarily it. So in Austin, we have a lot of really public events that have gained a ton of momentum throughout the country. You may have heard of some. ACL, aka Austin City Limits, huge music festival with big headliners, 2 weekends out of the year. In fact, it just wrapped up the last couple of weeks. We also have South by Southwest, which entails music, film, and television, and an interactive festival that has a lot of the major tech companies and startups showcasing their products. So it's a really cool event that's gained a ton of momentum over the last 10 to 20 years. We also now have Circuit of the Americas, which is our Formula One track and hosts the United States Grand Prix every year. So this has been a huge draw, not only across the country, but internationally. These are just a few of the major events that we have throughout the year. Now, my point in all of this is that a lot of the locals get kind of sick of having the influx of traffic and more congestion in the city when we have tens of thousands of people flocking to the area during this time. Of course, a ton of locals love to plug into these events because they're basically in our backyard. It just depends on what your preference is. Now, one of the other things that a lot of my clients and friends have done, especially if they live close to where these events are hosted, is they actually will Airbnb their properties over the course of the week or month and pay their mortgage just by those short-term rentals. They may pay their mortgage for a couple of months, which is incredible, especially considering that those rates are not inexpensive here in the Austin area. Overall, I think it's pretty neat to have those events hosted in our city if those are things that interest you, but just know that it comes with a lot of extra traffic and congestion during that time, as well as a ton of tourists, which when you become a local, that may not necessarily be your cup of tea. Now, I've heard this next one quite a bit, especially from many people relocating from some of the larger metros in comparison to Austin, and that relates to public transportation. Now, depending on where you're coming from, not a lot of people expect Texas and Austin in general to be as spread out as it is. So there is absolutely a necessity for a car. We have some public transportation. We also have a metro rail that runs into downtown and goes all the way up to Northwest Austin in Leander. Now, Unless you're going to a very specific stop on that metro rail, though, you probably are not going to find yourself using it and you're going to be relying on a car. But I have gotten that complaint because if you are coming from an area where you rely heavily on public transportation, or perhaps it's a nice fallback, you're just not going to find the same level of public transportation here in the Austin metro. Now, while I really hate this next thing I'm about to mention, I don't think it's actually my biggest complaint about the Austin area, which I'm going to highlight here shortly. Now, this next one is the fact that we have property taxes in Texas and of course in Austin. It is important to point out that we do not have a state income tax here, which is really nice, but it is very important to note that we have property taxes, and this particular tax rate is not consistent across the board. It will vary property to property and location to location. So it's very important that if you are considering a home search in the area that you reach out to me so that we can dive into a lot of the unexpected costs that you might incur related to a home purchase in the area. And property tax is probably the largest unexpected cost that you can expect. So it is very important to understand what to look for and how to find the home that suits your needs. Now, generally speaking too, a lot of people would expect that if you're moving to some of the suburbs around Greater Austin and going into some of the lower price points specifically, that may save you on property taxes, but that is not always the case. In some of these areas, property taxes are even higher than if you were to be in downtown or the city core. And the reason for that is because a lot of the infrastructure like water and sewer had to be installed by these developers, and the cost of that utility infrastructure was passed along to the homeowners in the form of property taxes. So again, it's a little counterintuitive and you really need to know these nuances about a particular area. So be sure to reach out to me and I'm happy to highlight some of those ins and outs. Now, this next one is a little bit unexpected for a lot of people, I think, because when you're moving to a major area like Austin, especially one that's home to a ton of major companies, including tech companies, you would expect to find a ton of job opportunity. And while there is a lot of job opportunity here in Austin, with the influx of people and the popularity of the Austin area in general, it also means an increase in job competition. So if you are relocating and you're not necessarily working remotely for your current company, or you're not relocating for a job transfer that you've already lined up and you will be looking for a new position, it's important to note that you may experience that increased job competition because of everybody else looking for the same type of opportunity here in the Austin metro. Of course, the positive to that though is that you have a ton of opportunities from which to choose. We are known as Silicon Hills now with all of the major tech employers that we have headquartered here in Austin. We're also the state capital. So if you are working for the government in some capacity, there are a ton of opportunities related to that, as well as major healthcare throughout the city. So again, a lot of opportunity, but just know that that might mean a little bit of increased job competition. Nothing you can't squash. Now we're slowly getting closer to my least favorite thing about Austin, and this is not it, but it could be it for some people. So I do want to point it out. Austin is a super active and outdoorsy lifestyle. Now we do have, of course, an urban element to it. We have a very active and vibrant downtown with a lot of shops and restaurants nearby, but one of the biggest draws to Austin is how active it is. Running just south of downtown, we have Lady Bird Lake, where you're going to find people kayaking, running along the river, and doing all sorts of outdoor activities. We also have Zilker Park and other little pocket parks throughout the city where you'll find a lot of people hanging out throughout the day. Everybody is participating in some sort of outdoor activity almost daily. So if you're moving to Austin and for whatever reason you're just not really a big outdoor enthusiast, then it may not necessarily be the spot for you. Like I mentioned earlier, we do of course have other things to do like a typical city would, shops, restaurants, a lot of live music, which of course is a huge draw to the city, but it all centers around a very active, relatively healthy lifestyle here in the area. Now, before I tell you what I ultimately dislike about the Austin area, I do want want to explain to you that we have a ton of wildlife, including little critters and insects in the greater Austin metro. In fact, pretty much in all of Texas. Now, growing up in San Antonio and being in Austin for so long, I didn't realize that wasn't really normal across the board. I have a lot of clients who have relocated from California and similar areas where they just don't have the same type of bugs, little critters, and wildlife. And that was definitely something that they had to get used to here in Austin. Now, a big reason for that is we have a ton of really beautiful vegetation. We have lots of oak trees, cedar trees. We do have water between lakes, rivers, and so many other watering holes. So a lot of the animals gravitate towards that. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have the Texas Hill Country as you go west of Austin. So with all of that vegetation and landscape comes all of those other things, some of which not many people love. Now, what I love about it though is that you can see all sorts of wildlife. Where I live over west of Austin near Lake Travis, we have a ton of deer. It's not unusual to see a lot of deer, including large bucks. I've even seen an axis deer, which I have no idea where that came from, but he was a big boy sitting in somebody's front yard. So you never know what you're going to see. As I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of people who relocate from California. A couple of my next door neighbors were actually from there as well. And each of those neighbors separately pointed out to me that the amount of bugs that we have in Texas are unusual. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Florida and in much more humid climates closer to the water and ocean, and that brings a whole different type of insects and other things to consider. Texas, in my opinion, is nowhere near that. You don't have to have a screened-in porch to enjoy the evenings or Texas summers. Now, I feel like I've built up a lot of hype around my major dislike, which also brings me to the 10th reason not to move to Austin, and that is the fact that we only have one professional sports team. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in San Antonio, and part of that, I got really spoiled going to the San Antonio Spurs games. If you're not familiar with it, that's the local NBA team, and I had an absolute blast. So being in Austin for so long, it's sort of a bummer that I have to drive to San Antonio to catch a game and that I can't root for a professional sports team in our particular city. Now, the one pro sports team that we do have, as I mentioned, is our Austin FC soccer team, and they are fantastic. It's a wonderful experience. It's a relatively new team. We have a newer stadium that was built just a few years ago, Q2 Stadium. I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's a wonderful experience and a ton of fun. But if soccer is not your cup of tea, or you really want more options from which to choose in terms of pro sports, it's just not here in Austin. Now, I do hope that in years to come, with the growth that we're experiencing, maybe we'll get some other pro sports teams, but for the time being, it's just that one soccer team. Now, I do want to point out that we are a big college sports team, having UT Austin in our city center. Tons of people have gone to UT. They've stayed in Austin because they love the city. So a ton of alumni and others who are just massive UT fans are going to be downtown tailgating, prepping for all of the games. So it's a huge college experience that you can definitely tap into regardless of attending UT Austin. For me though, and probably many others, that you're either a college sports fan or a pro fan more than others. You may enjoy both, but maybe not the same. So again, I do always want to point out that in Austin, we only have that one pro sports team, and it's sort of a bummer despite being able to tap into other sports experiences. Of course, as I mentioned at the start of this video, there is so much good in Austin, numerous things to experience, and that is why so many people have chosen Austin as their home. Again, I like to make sure that you have the complete picture so that you can ultimately decide if Austin's the right city for you. Be sure to reach out to me because I would love to share more about the nuances and inner workings of the city, all of the wonderful things that it also has to offer, and ultimately help you find the right spot for yourself. Just as a reminder, my name is Aubrey von Behren. I'm a licensed real estate broker here in the Austin Metro, helping hundreds of people relocate and move within the city over the past decade. I would love to help with your home search as well. So call, text, email, be sure to schedule an appointment with me, and let's dive in a little bit more in depth to exactly what you're looking for here in Austin.